Now I have the great pleasure of introducing Vicente Hao Chin Jr., affectionately known to us as Vic. He is president of the Golden Link College. He's author of The Process of Self-Transformation, Education Without Fear and Comparison. He also compiled and edited the Mahatma Letters to AP Senate, chronological edition. He is the past president of the Theosophical Society in the Philippines and of the Indo-Pacific Federation of the Theosophical Society. He also served as chairman of the Theosophical Order of Service Foundation of the Philippines. He is currently a member of the General Council of the Theosophical Society. Today, Vic will be talking to us about working on the root cause of human suffering. Please welcome Vic Hao Chin.
Thank you, Kathy. Good morning to all of you. In connection with our theme, I'd like to share with you some thoughts about an important area of our work in the future for the Theosophical Order of Service. The mission of the TOS is simply to minimize suffering in the world out of compassion and love for them. Now, there are two main sources of suffering in the world. The first one is natural, like COVID, floods, typhoons, and so on. And the second one are sufferings caused by us fellow human beings, injustices, wars, corruptions, and other things. Now, solutions are known to alleviate suffering, but the main obstacles towards their alleviation are due to cultural and political mindsets that prevent the implementation of such solutions. Let me share with you some paradoxical situations today in the world, and I've often wondered for many, many years why this is happening in the world today. For example, the world's military spending today, or last year, was 2.7 trillion US dollars. It is an increase of 9.3% compared to the previous year, 2023. This is from Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. Now, take note, just 1.5% of this military budget can end world hunger by 2030. This is just about 5 years from now. World hunger can be arrested by a measly 1.5% of this expense on military arms, military payroll, and so on. There is enough food, according to the United Nations, enough food to feed everybody on Earth. And yet, hunger continues to stalk the Earth today. Today, there are 733 million people who go to bed hungry each night. And 50% of child deaths are due to hunger. This is from Action, the NGO called Action Against Hunger. The problem, therefore, is not because there is insufficient food. It is the policies, mindset, separated thinking, and non-cooperation among governments and countries. The United Nations has already drawn up the means to end world hunger through agricultural productivity, sustainability, rural infrastructure, decrease of trade restrictions on food, and so on. This has been planned already. So the question is that, can we end poverty in the world? In addition to hunger, can we end poverty in the world? Yes, we can. It just needs another 3 up to 12% of the military budget to end world poverty again in 5 years' time, by 2030. Just 3 to 12%. This is about 75 to 325 billion per year, compared to almost $3 trillion in military spending. Poverty is defined as earning below $2.17 US $17 a day and is estimated to be almost half of the world. And extreme poverty is counted as those earning below 1.29 US dollars a day. And there are about 700 million people today in the world who are under that category. Now, imagine a world without poverty, and it just needs perhaps 6% of what the world spends on arms and defenses. In 2021, more than 50 Nobel Prize winners signed a petition for countries to reduce their military spending by just 2% per year for 5 years and allocate this for the alleviation of poverty and other major problems of humanity. Unfortunately, instead of reducing their military budget, our military spending around the world increased in the past few years. Now, there is another kind of poverty which is almost as serious as the material or financial poverty. This is what we may call learning poverty. In low or middle income countries, 53% of children cannot read and understand a simple story by the end of primary school. In some countries, it may go as high as 80%, this virtual ignorance of the population when you have such a population. A society that suffers from learning poverty will also suffer from material poverty. Usually, educated people are more ready to sustain themselves financially and materially, but when they are not equipped with proper education. Now, one of the characteristics of learning poverty is that it affects women and girls more. Girls have fewer opportunities in getting an education. In countries like Afghanistan, girls are banned, officially banned, from going to school beyond primary grades. This means 1.4 million girls in 2024, or a total of 2.4 million if you include those who have been prevented from going to school in previous years. This represents 80% of school-age girls in Afghanistan. Regarding this, I'll just mention my wife and I were able to visit Kenya and visited a Maasai community. Maasai community are the indigenous people in Kenya, and we visited their huts. They had no electricity. They had no plumbing system. When they need water to drink, they have to go down to the river in order to get water. So that's their condition. We went to their huts. The floor is just the ground, and it's just a round thing, and that's all they have. However, we had friendship with one such Maasai young person who spoke English and who was quite educated. In fact, he planned to go to the city, maybe to Nairobi, in order to take up medicine. And the last time that I had communicated with him, he was already at the university. Now, this person, I think, will never become poor again for the rest of his life because of education. Now, one of the sources of low education for girls is also the practice of child marriage in many cultures. More than 41,000 girls under 18 marry every day. And ending child marriage would increase women's expected educational attainment and their potential earnings. It could generate more than $500 billion in benefits every year, according to the World Bank survey. So, an estimated lost lifetime earnings for girls would be the limited educational opportunities for girls and barriers to completing 12 years of education cost countries between $15 trillion to $30 trillion in lost lifetime productivity, and earnings. This also comes from the World Bank study. Now, in contrast to this learning poverty, we have on the opposite end high-pressure education. And this comes from many of the developing or advanced countries in the world. There is a growing culture of high-pressured rat race and competition in many developing countries, and this has led to serious waves of student suicides in many countries, leading to severe mental health problems among young people. Here's an example. Student suicide in Japan is the #1 cause of the deaths of teens in Japan. You will see here from a study from 1980 up to 2024 how these suicides are going upwards. And these are divided into elementary students, even elementary students committing suicide. The highest rate of suicide in Japan is during the first day of opening in September 1 every year. At the end of the spring break, or I think the summer break, then the first day, September 1, that is when the student suicide would pick up. And this is because of the culture of examinations, high pressure, rat race, and the culture for material success. This is not only in Japan, but also in China. It has led to teen suicides. Then it is also happening in Hong Kong. Hong Kong is one of the highest per capita income regions in the world. And then student suicide is the leading cause of death also in South Korea, from age 15 to 24. Then in India, according to the Times of India, 1 student kills self every hour in India. This was a few years ago. So this is happening in countries where the values give high emphasis to financial success, creating another kind of mental health problem. Something is seriously wrong in such a situation. Young people prefer death rather than fail examinations. Are examinations now more important than the life of a young boy or girl? Now, let me go on to another kind of modern problem which the world is facing. It's about slavery. We would think that slavery has ended after the Civil War in the United States more than a century ago. However, we're surprised that there is still modern slavery. According to the Anti-Slavery International, there are 49.6 or almost 50 million people who live in modern slavery, in forced labor and forced marriage. 1/4 of all victims of modern slavery are children. 22 million are in forced marriages, and 2 of 5 of these are children. 17.3 million are in forced labor in private exploitation, and 6.3 million are in commercial sexual exploitation, and 4 million are in forced labor imposed by state authorities, the governments. This comes from a book called Global Estimates of Modern Slavery, Forced Labor, and Forced Marriage in Geneva in 2022. Now, we could go on with a longer list of serious problems faced by modern civilization. But one thing to be noted in these is that they do not involve factors, uncontrollable factors brought about by nature or calamities. These problems that we have mentioned are caused by human values, cultural values, attitudes, insecurity, perception, and mindsets. Why do countries spend 13% of gross domestic product on military equipment and personnel, and only 2% on education, health, or anti-poverty programs? It is due to insecurity in our relationship with our neighbors. Why are girls and women treated unequally in terms of social and educational rights? It is due to cultural conditioning brought about by tradition or religion. Why are progressive countries pressuring their children to suicide by making them hyper-competitive? It is again due to cultural values brought about by what they perceive as what is the meaningful or successful life. These are all opinions, perceptions of what is important and urgent, perpetuated by parents, traditions, religions, and schools, and perpetuated again by media. These are the root causes of major contemporary global problems that humanity is facing. We tend to think of wars as a conflict between nations, about territories, about economic issues. But take note that this has been going on for thousands of years, and among nations where there is a mutually positive perception of one another, they don't even think of wars against each other. But for those who feel hostility against another nation, race, or religion, they are ready to fight. These are all perceptions rather than objective realities. And these are the root causes of major contemporary global problems that humanity is facing. While we need to attend to the firefighting work, in other words, there are urgent issues today in the world that we must address. But we must not lose sight of the fact that we must not neglect working towards the ultimate solutions, which will eradicate or transform the values, opinions, and perceptions that are the real causes of these injustices, violence, inequalities, and misplaced priorities. In other words, our real work should be in the realm of the human mind and values. Unless these are changed, the policies of governments, the attitudes of peoples, the hostilities among nations, the discrimination against women will continue on and on, generation after generation. This is the reason why, when UNESCO was founded after World War II, in their constitution, the first sentence is this: since wars begin in the minds of men, it is in the minds of men that the defenses of peace must be constructed. This is true not only when it comes to war and peace, but it is also true for issues on poverty, gender equality, slavery, injustice, corruption, and other things. One of the root obstacles to global solutions is the existing political structure that we have in the world today. This is another mindset that we have inherited from past centuries or millennia. In the Middle Ages, the structure of society is based generally on feudalism or similar structures, with princes or lords virtually autonomous of one another and were sovereigns. They fight wars among the principalities, and in the 19th century, the idea of a nation, of nationalism, emerged and prevailed. So now what we have today are about 210 nations separate from each other, building their own armed forces and ready to fight, defend, and even invade another nation. It is just feudalism on a larger scale. This idea is no longer viable for the modern world. The earth or the world has shrunk. We are just fellow human beings in a tiny ball floating in this infinite universe, a very, very tiny ball trying to survive and live a happier life. Now, this kind of expanded feudalism has led to countries building up huge nuclear arsenal that could wipe out humanity. We are now entering into another phase of human development where we have to embrace not just internationalism, but globalism. The idea that we are one single humanity on this tiny planet Earth. If we cannot cooperate together, then we may have to perish together. This is the reason why, after World War II, during the formation of the United Nations, Albert Einstein strongly, vociferously advocated the establishment of a world government where nations can continue to govern themselves, but giving up their own armed forces, in favor of a global peacekeeping force governed by an entity like the United Nations. Unfortunately, the major nations, the strongest nations at the time, were not ready for this idea. And we find that nations are just an expanded version of tribalism. Einstein wrote, he said, "Nationalism is an infantile disease. As a citizen of Germany, I saw how excessive nationalism can spread like a disease, bringing tragedy to millions. I am against any nationalism, even in the guise of mere patriotism." Now, will we need a World War III before the governments of the world decide to band together and prohibit wars or ban wars between nations permanently? It is doable, and yet the leading nations are not willing to. Now, what can be our role in bringing about such a future transformation? We need to work on the minds of people. I think there's no other way. Transforming the way they perceive things, their values, their assumptions, and perceptions. While we continue to attend to urgent relief and charity work that we do today, we must allocate time and effort to the modification of the mindsets and public opinion of various countries, such as the following key ideas about humanity. First, is the oneness of humanity without any distinction of race, religion, gender, social status. And today, most people still don't believe in this. It sounds like a cliche, universal brotherhood or sisterhood. But the motherhood statement sounds very nice. But when it comes to actual implementation, I suppose that most people would hesitate to carry it out. People still do not trust each other enough to be willing to give up their armies and weapons. But there are countries today who have given up their armed forces, such as Costa Rica and Central America, which in 1949, this was just a few years after World War II, put in their constitution the abolition of armies. And since 1949 up to this day, which is almost about, 80 years already, Costa Rica has been one of the most peaceful and progressive nations in Central America without any armies. Now, this educational work towards the changing of attitudes and mindsets must continue generation after generation, century after century. It is, by the way, one of the 4 key things that Blavatsky says must be disseminated. The first one is universal solidarity, the oneness of all life. Then human solidarity, which is this one, being one family regardless of nations. Then the other 3 and 4th would be karma and reincarnation. She mentions that we must advocate this, popularize these ideas. The second one is the need to emphasize morality as an essential core of religion rather than dogmas and doctrines. Many of you are aware that religion is one of the most divisive factors in world civilization. The longest wars were waged due to religious differences. The longest war was the Crusades for 200 years. Then you have many wars in Europe, Asia, and other places due to religious differences. But this is because of their emphasis on dogmas and doctrines rather than on ethics. Being a good and spiritual person is more important than whether God is a Trinity or Scripture is literally the Word of God. We need to strongly oppose exclusivistic and divisive fundamentalism. Another one is promoting world government. This idea has been brought about even by the philosopher Immanuel Kant and other thinkers of the earlier centuries. But somehow, because of our tribalistic mentality, this doesn't seem to catch on very seriously. And yet, in the end, it must be where we should go. Because this kind of separative nations with their own armed forces will always lead to wars because of insecurity. For example, in the case, let's say, of, I'm thinking of, let's say, the United States composed of many states. No state, aside from policemen, have their own armies. And so whenever there are conflicts, they go to court, they go to arbitration, and not go to war between one state and another. The European Union is another growing example of such a situation. Why can't we do it in the world? It can be done. And there is a need to advocate this. There are countless books written on this, including proposed structures and how can this be done. But so long as the mentality of world leaders is that we have to defend ourselves, prepare ourselves for an attack by other nations, then this cannot happen. Then a fourth area is the need for justice and compassion to the powerless, like equal rights to women, ending modern slavery. The fifth is healing of the earth, instead of unrestricted consumerism and the prevention of the destruction of nature and our limited resources. And the fifth is to advocate an educational agenda that will promote above ideas, based on character and right values above financial successes. How do we intensify such advocacies? Even not all of them, but selected number of them. Now, the main venue right now, the most effective, the cheapest, the widest, the most far-reaching avenue is through social media. And it is so, it can change a lot of people's thinking. It can even change the results of elections. In the Philippines, social media has become a big factor, even in elections. However, the social media world has become so competitive, so many people are there, that we are just one voice out of millions or even billions of those who are advocating this or that. And therefore, we need to strengthen our presence in social media. Another one is to influence public opinion through schools. We influence schools. We influence educational curricula, philosophies, approaches to education, promoting the right educational philosophy, and establishing our own school networks. Then the third would be publications. While digitization is now the mode of communication mainly, but still there is a place for books, booklets, and leaflets. We should try to see whether we can produce brief, readable, interesting, and attractive publications and reaching out to more people. The fourth is to influence public policies by being involved in policy-making groups, whether local or international. Then, linking with other groups. We in TOS, or even in the Theosophical Society, we advocate a lot of things that many other organizations are also advocating. If there are no conflicts, basic conflicts between those movements and ours, then I think it would be safe to link up with them. Of course, there are those with mixed agenda, and their other advocacies are not compatible with TOS or Theosophical Society, and in that sense, we have to be quite careful. However, synergy, I think, is one of the most important ideas that we have to entertain in becoming more effective. And in this aspect, I believe that we in the TOS, we will have to think also about globalizing our own local initiatives and advocacies. In other words, the TOS as a global movement can become stronger by global cooperation, support, and shared activities. I'll just give an example about what we have observed and talked about in the past few days about education. There are many of those who spoke about this already. Many TS sections or TOS groups have linked hands and helped each other in this area, and it has produced quite remarkable results in a few years. For example, due to the inspiration of previous educational efforts in India and other things like, for example, Waldorf schools, we in the Philippines, under the guidelines of previous thinkers, theosophical thinkers on this, we established schools. And now we have 7 schools in the Philippines, up to college level, from kindergarten to college. And after this, Adyar became interested in setting up a similar school in Chennai, in Adyar. And a few years ago, the school was established. I went there many times in order to help train the teachers, discuss the curriculum, and set up. And it is very successful. In fact, it is expanding right now, and TS is allocating more land areas for its new buildings. And after this, Brazil is another TS section that has picked this up and wanted to establish a school, and now they have already decided on it, and they are now applying for registration with the government. They have allocated a piece of land, they want to put up a building, and soon, maybe this year or next year, we'll have another school in Brazil. Argentina had this idea also. They sent a person for 6 months to the Philippines, and their plan is also to establish a school in Argentina. Now, today, these days, I learned that Spain is also thinking about this direction, although it's just the beginning, but they are thinking about this seriously. The interest in this kind of education has grown such that publications on theosophical education had been translated in many languages. So this has happened because of the cooperation, the linkage among nations regarding one single advocacy, and that is on education. But it can be done in many other areas. For example, most sections are advocating vegetarianism or veganism. And I'm thinking about an organization like PETA. What is this? People for ethical treatment of animals. I think it's not a big organization, but it's found all over the world. In the Philippines, there are branches, a small group of people, but they are quite well known now, and they're advocating not only about animal welfare, but also veganism. In 1943, a theosophist, Geoffrey Hudson, founded the New Zealand Vegetarian Society. So it has been going on for about 80 years already. It has its own office, staff, publications, and so on. And they have a lot of experience about how to propagate, disseminate, and educate people on vegetarianism or veganism. Now, many people, for example, in the Philippines, many among us are also interested in this. But a lot of people don't know how to start it. But if we learn from New Zealand, then we can adopt the same thing and then link up with them. And if there are 10 more countries who would link up and learn from these approaches, we would be able to be more effective advocates of vegetarianism or veganism. I think there is so much work that can be done through the TOS that will help influence national cultures, mindsets, and public opinions, and which are the keys to long-term transformation of entire societies. So, in fact, I was thinking, Nancy, that perhaps the TOS can set up a website that will contain the best practices of many of these TOS groups around the world. I just heard, for example, I heard from Deepa about the Sambedana Charity Center, where people just donate things that they don't use anymore, which could be very useful to other people. There's something similar to the free store concept, but it is something that can be adopted in many countries. So if we could have a website that will describe, even briefly, this concept, then it can be picked up by other TOS groups around the world and restarted and linked with each other. Now, all these things may sound very idealistic and distant, hard to achieve, but if these are humanity's long-term goals, then we must persist and persevere, even if we don't see immediate results. A giant tree takes hundreds of years to grow and mature, and we have to be patient. There are many things that are important which we can achieve in our lifetime. And today, despite our technological and economic progress in the world, we find that our global society is in many ways psychologically sick. While urgent measures are needed to deal with the consequences of such sickness, the more important task is the ultimate prevention and the development of wholesomeness, the prevention of such sickness. And these lie in the hearts and minds of people. And I think ultimately we have to direct our attention to this area of work. And these are the keys to a truly peaceful, harmonious, and caring world that we all dream about. Let us be a major part of such work. Good morning to all of you.
Thank you so much, Vic.